My mom excluded me from her 40th anniversary and said, "You wouldn't fit in, it's couples only." As she cashed the $5,000 I sent for dad's medication, they mocked me behind my back, called me their personal ATM. Now their names are forever etched into federal court records. Hey Reddit, my parents always saw me as their personal bank, and I kept paying because I thought I was helping. Then I found out they'd been lying, stealing, and laughing about it behind my back. But before we get there, let me start from the beginning. My name is Chris Brennan, I'm 36, and I'm a trauma surgeon at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. My job is simple in theory: stop people from dying. In practice, it's blood, chaos, and exhaustion, stacked into weeks that blur together. For the past 3 years, since I finished fellowship and signed my attending contract, I've wired $5,000 every month to my parents, Victor and Helena, because they said they needed help. Dad's heart medication, overdue mortgage payments, unexpected bills, all of it sounded urgent. They never asked outright. They didn't have to. Guilt does the talking when you're the firstborn and the responsible one. The plan was to open my own urgent care clinic on Chicago's South Side. That dream stayed in neutral because family comes first. Every time I was close to pulling the trigger on a business loan, another crisis arrived. Another payment, another month on hold. 2 weeks before my father's birthday, my mother called while I was driving home from a double shift. Her tone was cheerful, almost giddy. "We're planning something special," she said. "Our 40th anniversary. A real celebration. You know how hard we've worked, how much we've sacrificed. It's time to enjoy life a little." I smiled, even as I fought traffic on Lakeshore Drive. "Sounds great. When is it?" There was a pause. "Well, we decided to keep it small. Just close friends and family." "I'm family," I said. "Of course you are," she replied quickly. "But it's mostly couples. People with kids. You'd feel out of place. You're always so busy anyway. We didn't want you to feel obligated." The line went dead quiet. I didn't push it, but something in the way she said you'd feel out of place stuck with me. A few days later, June, my younger sister Melanie, posted an invitation flyer on Instagram. Brennan 40th Anniversary Gala, Chicago Cultural Center. Black tie, 250 guests, live band, catered dinner, $150 per plate menu. The event looked more like a Fortune 500 fundraiser than an anniversary dinner. I wasn't invited. 2 days after that, I received an email from a catering company addressed to my mother, but accidentally CC'd to me. Attached was a payment receipt for $26,400, charged to a checking account I fund with my monthly transfers. The same account I'd set up years ago so they could pay medical bills without delay. They'd used my money to throw a party I wasn't welcome at. I stared at the screen for a long time before closing the email. They didn't even think they needed to ask. They just took. And the idea that I wouldn't be there to see where my money went wasn't an oversight. It was planned. I tried to shake it off. Surgery schedules, chart reviews, overnight calls. They usually drowned out everything else. But this stuck to me like blood on scrubs. The gala came and went. Photos appeared online. My parents smiling in tuxedos, Melanie posing next to a champagne tower, speeches about family values and sacrifice. My name was even mentioned on the program. Not as a guest, but as one of the platinum contributors. I was paying for a night I hadn't even been invited to. 2 weeks later, after a 14-hour trauma shift, I was still thinking about that party when my phone buzzed. A voicemail. I put it on speaker as I scrubbed out. It was my mother's voice again. But this time it wasn't cheerful. It was mocking, and it wasn't meant for me. "Chris is such an easy mark," she said, laughing with someone she called Linda. "Our personal ATM with a medical degree. Honestly, I thought he'd wise up after we left him out of the party. But no, he's still sending the money like a good little soldier. Can you believe he thinks Victor's meds cost thousands?" More laughter. Then with a smug sigh, "And he still feels guilty for moving out. That guilt will keep paying for our retirement." The message ended. The silence in the scrub room felt colder than the steel sink. I replayed it once, twice. By the third time, I didn't need to hear it anymore. The words were carved into my brain. 2 days later, a letter arrived from First Midwest Bank. A $250,000 home equity line of credit, secured by a Lake Geneva property deeded in my name without my knowledge, had been opened in my name, co-signed by Victor and Helena. My signature was at the bottom. It wasn't mine. The bank confirmed it. My social security number, my credit history, all used to secure the loan. And the account? Nearly maxed out. I filed a police report. The detective shrugged. "If it's family, the DA might treat it as civil. Best bet is mediation." The good son was gone. From here on, I was something else entirely. Mediation. As if forging a loan and calling me their ATM was a family disagreement. The first step was simple: find the money. I sat on my living room floor surrounded by bank statements, tax records, and transaction logs stretching back 3 years. Every transfer I'd made, $5,000 on the first of each month, was documented. But where it went after leaving my account was harder to track. The account my parents used was in both their names, and they'd always claimed it was for bills. I started matching my transfers against their expenses. Nothing lined up. The first thing I checked was my father's medication. He'd said the pills cost over $1,000 a month, and I'd never questioned it. Instead of calling the pharmacy, I pulled the explanation of benefits from his Part D portal, the login my parents had given me years ago to help with paperwork. The numbers were blunt. With Medicare Part D, his monthly out-of-pocket was $87.46, and it had been for years. Next, the house. The mortgage was supposed to be crippling them. I'd heard that excuse since residency. A visit to the Cook County Recorder of Deeds site showed the truth. The mortgage had been fully paid off 8 years ago. Even worse, they'd refinanced the property twice since then, pulling out more than $600,000 in cash equity. That money was nowhere in their accounts now. I moved on to loan records. A background check on my own credit history turned my stomach. 2 SBA small business loans, one for $75,000, another for $125,000, had been issued in my name over the past 2 years. The listed business? A digital wellness startup registered to an address in my parents' neighborhood. I'd never even heard of it. I needed help. Someone who could go deeper than public records. That's when I called Daniel Rios. Daniel and I met in college. He'd gone into cybersecurity, working for a private firm that specialized in tracking stolen funds and building financial fraud cases. When I explained the situation, there was no hesitation. "Bring everything," he said. "We'll map the flow." We spent the next 2 nights in his office, walls lined with whiteboards and monitors, streaming data. I handed him my documents, and he started digging. Daniel started by mapping the outflows from my transfers, recipient banks, dates, and reference numbers, just from my own statements. The money jumped to a small Nevada bank and then split. Some into a brokerage, some into high-end retail, and some to wire recipients overseas. We could see where the wires landed, but not who really owned the destination accounts. That part took legal process. Once the subpoenas hit, the banks produced KYC packets and ownership records. That's when the shell companies surfaced, variations on my mother's maiden name, and the offshore accounts tied back to them. One domestic recipient called itself a charitable foundation raising money for cardiac patients. On paper, it existed. In reality, it had no staff, no programs, and no board beyond a single incorporator. It was a pass-through. "This is organized," Daniel said, scrolling through another layer of data. "And if they used your identity to open those SBA loans, we're looking at federal crimes. Wire fraud, bank fraud, identity theft, the whole package." He was right. I started researching Illinois law. Under 720 Illinois compiled statutes 5/16-30, identity theft involving over $100,000 is a Class 1 felony, 4 to 15 years in prison. Wire fraud under 18 U.S.C. Section 1343 could mean 20 years. Mail fraud under Section 1341 of Title 18 of the United States Code. Same penalty. Even the fake charity fell under IRS criminal code for nonprofit misrepresentation. The deeper we dug, the uglier it became. They'd siphoned my money into brokerage accounts to fund speculative crypto trades. They'd purchased high-end furniture and charged it to a credit line created with my social security number. They'd even made down payments on a lake house in Wisconsin, in my name. "They didn't just drain you," Daniel said, leaning back from the screen. "They built a whole lifestyle around you." It hit me then. This wasn't desperation. It wasn't even greed. It was entitlement turned into a system. They believed they had a right to my income, my credit, and my future, and they'd structured their lives around that belief. By the time we wrapped for the night, our initial review flagged roughly $600,000 in suspect flows, some of which overlapped with the $250,000 in fraudulent loans and nearly $180,000 funneled through the fake charity. And that was just the surface. The evidence was irrefutable. Every lie they'd told, every emergency, every debt, every bill was part of a deliberate plan. They hadn't stumbled into fraud. They'd engineered it. But proof wasn't enough. If this was going to end, I needed more than documents. I needed to show them, and the law, that I wasn't their victim anymore. The next step wasn't gathering evidence. It was going on the offensive. The evidence Daniel and I uncovered was enough to put anyone behind bars. But if I expected my parents to panic or apologize, I was wrong. They doubled down. It started with a phone call from my mother. "You haven't sent the transfer this month," Helena said, her tone sharp. "Your father needs an experimental treatment. Insurance won't cover it. It's urgent." I didn't answer immediately. "What treatment?" "You don't need the details," she snapped. "Just send the money." I told her I knew about the insurance coverage, the real medication cost, the offshore accounts. The silence on the line lasted several seconds before she exhaled heavily. "You really are ungrateful," she hissed, "after everything we've done for you." Then she hung up. 2 days later, there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, my father pushed his way into my apartment, his face flushed with anger. "What the hell are you doing?" Victor shouted. "Your mother's in tears. You're humiliating this family." "Humiliating?" I said. "By refusing to keep funding your lies?" He jabbed a finger at me. "You don't talk to your parents like that. We raised you. We sacrificed everything. You wouldn't even be a doctor without us." Neighbors were peering into the hallway now, phones raised. Victor didn't care. He was in full performance mode. "You owe us," he shouted. "You owe us for your education, your childhood, everything. 5,000 a month is nothing compared to what we gave you." "Then call it even," I said, stepping back and pointing to the door. "We're done." He cursed, slammed the door, and stormed down the hallway while the neighbors filmed the entire scene. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. Within a week, I started hearing from relatives. My aunt called first, confused. She'd lent my parents $30,000 last year after they told her I had cut them off and refused to help. An uncle followed, saying they'd borrowed another $20,000 from him, claiming I was hoarding money and abandoning them. Every story was the same. They'd painted me as a selfish son who refused to support his family. And every time, they used that lie to collect more money. The lies didn't stop with family. My sister Melanie called to tell me I was destroying our parents by turning on them publicly. When I reminded her that they'd committed multiple felonies, she said it wasn't real crime because family money stays in the family. It was delusion, total, unfiltered delusion, and it was spreading. That's when Sophia Morales called. Daniel had reached out to her earlier. Sophia was an investigative reporter for the Chicago Tribune, known for exposing financial abuse and charity fraud. She'd started digging into the Brennans and found something even we hadn't. "There's a property in Lake Geneva," she said. "Waterfront, 4 bedrooms, bought in your name 18 months ago." "I've never owned property in Wisconsin." "Well, according to the deed, you do, and it's the collateral for that $250,000 HELOC. Same file numbers, same forged signature. Monthly payments are coming from the same account that receives your transfers." The property was worth nearly $800,000, and my forged signature was on the deed. I contacted my bank immediately. They froze 2 of my accounts pending investigation, citing irregular activity. My credit score plummeted by 140 points in less than a week. Creditors started calling about missed payments for loans I'd never taken. Then came the letter from the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation. My medical license renewal had been flagged. The pending identity theft reports and financial investigations were now part of my record. Until they were resolved, my renewal would be under review. I stared at the letter for a long time. This was no longer about money. This was about my future, my career. Everything I had built, every sacrifice I had made, was now tied to their crimes. I called Daniel that night. "They're trying to burn it all down," I said. "They're desperate," he replied. "They know you're close. They think if they destroy your credibility, they'll walk." "They won't," I said. "I'm done reacting. It's time to hit back." Daniel didn't argue. He knew what I meant. We'd collected enough evidence to bury them. They weren't just stealing money anymore. They were stealing my name, my credit, my reputation, my career. They were lying to family, manipulating anyone who would listen, and convincing themselves it was all justified. I started drafting a plan that night, not just to stop them, but to destroy everything they'd built with my name. Every shell company, every fake charity, every asset they'd hidden behind forged documents. I would bring it all into the light, and I would do it publicly. And when it was over, they wouldn't just be broke, they'd be exposed. They had spent years telling the world I was the ungrateful son. Now they were going to find out exactly how much gratitude I had left. In September, the charity gala was supposed to be the Brennans' crowning moment. 40 years of community leadership and selfless service were being honored with a black tie banquet at the Art Institute of Chicago. Invitations had gone out to local politicians, donors, hospital executives, and more than a few people I worked with. It was the perfect stage, and exactly where I planned to dismantle their story. Daniel and I spent 2 weeks building the presentation. Every bank transfer was documented, every forged signature scanned. Tax records, wire transfers, property deeds, even the offshore accounts were traced and labeled. Sophia contributed screenshots of public records, charity filings, and the fake foundation's non-existent board. I included the voice message, the one where my mother called me their ATM. It would play at the end. The night of the gala, I wore the same black suit I'd worn to medical school graduation. Not because the event required it, but because I wanted them to see the man they had tried to break, and realize they'd failed. Daniel and I arrived 20 minutes after the program began. The ballroom was filled with over 300 guests, champagne flutes in hand, all applauding my parents as they stood on stage shaking hands with the city councilman. My father looked proud, my mother radiant. They had no idea what was coming. We didn't wing it. Sophia had convinced a junior producer, spooked by what she'd found on the Heartstrong filings, to give us a 2-minute program update slot in the official run of show. Daniel had already sent our deck to the AV vendor that afternoon. It was queued as S7 on their console, verified at soundcheck. We came in through the loading dock with temporary tech badges and waited at the stage right riser. When the MC called the sponsor update and the room dimmed, our first slide hit the screen. When the applause ended, I walked toward the stage. Conversations died as I climbed the steps and took the microphone from the startled MC. "My name is Dr. Chris Brennan," I said, my voice steady. "I wasn't invited tonight, but I'm here because you deserve to know who you're honoring." My father's face went pale. My mother mouthed something I couldn't hear. I nodded to Daniel. The lights dimmed, and the first slide appeared on the screen. A bank statement showing $5,000 wired from my account every month for 3 years. "That's $180,000, I said. Money I sent to my parents because they told me they were drowning in medical debt and mortgage payments. The next slide, the county record of their home, paid off 8 years ago, followed by the refinancing documents showing $600,000 withdrawn in cash. They told me they were about to lose their house. They weren't. They refinanced it twice and pocketed the money. Murmurs swept the room. My father tried to grab the microphone. I stepped aside. "Sit down, Dad," I said calmly. "You're going to want to hear this." The next slide showed forged SBA loan documents totaling $200,000, my name and social security number on every page. Then property deeds for the Lake Geneva house, the Cayman Island account routing numbers, and the fake Heartstrong Foundation filings with my mother's name as director. "They used my identity to take out federal loans," I said. "They opened shell companies, laundered money through a fake nonprofit, and purchased property in my name. That's identity theft, wire fraud, bank fraud, and money laundering. All federal crimes." Gasps filled the room. One man in the back shouted, "I gave money to that foundation." Another woman stormed toward the exit, phone already in hand. "Maybe you're wondering why I'm telling you this here," I continued. "Because tonight's celebration was paid for with stolen money. My money. And yours." The final clip played. My mother's voice echoed through the ballroom. "Chris is such an easy mark. Our personal ATM with a medical degree." Silence. My father broke first. "He's lying," he shouted. "He's mentally unstable. He's trying to ruin us because he's jealous." My mother followed, trembling but defiant. "He's exaggerating everything. It's just family money. We raised him. We deserve something back." But their words didn't land. Dozens of faces in the audience were familiar. Distant cousins, neighbors, donors. I watched realization ripple across them as they connected dots. The mysterious loans, the charity fundraisers, the endless stories of hardship. One of my uncles stood and yelled, "You borrowed $40,000 from me last year for medical bills." Was that a lie too? Chaos erupted. Relatives shouted questions. Donors demanded answers. My parents tried to leave the stage, but reporters from local papers, tipped off by Sophia, were already outside. Cameras flashed as we walked past them. "Dr. Brennan, is it true your parents defrauded you? Do you plan to press charges? Were other family members involved?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. By the next morning, every major Chicago news outlet had picked it up. Prestigious Chicago family accused of defrauding own son in six-figure scheme. The article included screenshots of forged documents and a transcript of the voicemail. Social media exploded. Donations to the Heartstrong Foundation evaporated overnight. Sponsors pulled out of partnerships. The Brennan name, once a staple of neighborhood galas, became a punchline. But the retaliation came fast. 3 days after the gala, a courier arrived at my apartment with a thick envelope. Inside was a defamation lawsuit filed in Cook County Circuit Court. The complaint claimed I'd caused irreparable damage to the Brennan family's reputation and sought $2 million in damages. That same afternoon, a detective left a voicemail saying Helena Brennan had filed an elder abuse complaint with the Illinois Department on Aging. The claim, I was financially controlling and emotionally abusive and had cut them off from necessary medical care. If proven, it was a felony. And if the Department of Financial and Professional Regulation saw it as credible, it could cost me my medical license. It was a predictable move, classic counterattack. But I wasn't panicking. The difference between their story and mine was evidence, and I had more than enough to crush them in court. They had turned what could have been a quiet reckoning into a public war. The defamation lawsuit and elder abuse complaint weren't surprises. They were tactics. My parents had played every manipulation card they had left. It was time to answer with something stronger. The law. The morning after the papers were served, I sat across from Rachel Kim in a quiet office overlooking the Chicago River. She was one of the top financial crimes attorneys in the state, sharp, precise, and known for never losing a case involving fraud. They're cornered, she said, scanning the folders Daniel and I had compiled. That makes them dangerous, but also predictable. They're trying to change the narrative before we can control it. Rachel was calm but relentless as she laid out the plan. First, we'd go civil. Fraud, conversion, unjust enrichment, breach of fiduciary duty, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. In parallel, she'd refer our package to federal authorities because the forged SBA loans and wire activity read like classic identity theft, wire fraud, 18 U.S.C. Section 1343, mail fraud, 18 U.S.C. Section 1341, and related offenses under Illinois law. That afternoon, Rachel filed a civil suit in Cook County. Fraud, conversion, unjust enrichment, breach of fiduciary duty, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. At the same time, she bundled our evidence into a referral packet for the FBI's Chicago field office and IRS criminal investigations. A few weeks later, after prosecutors reviewed the materials, the feds opened a joint investigation. A grand jury was impaneled and subpoenas started landing. Banks, brokerages, and the so-called charity. The Brennans didn't stay quiet. My mother went on morning talk shows, calling me a sociopath who had abandoned his aging parents for money. She claimed the documents were fabricated, that I was trying to destroy the family name out of resentment. My father called reporters to tell them I had mental health issues and was dangerously unstable. It was coordinated, a full-scale smear campaign. The media storm worked in one way. It put pressure on my employer. 2 weeks after the gala, I was called into a meeting with the hospital board. The chairman, an older surgeon I respected, didn't waste words. Dr. Brennan, he said, until these legal matters are resolved, we're suspending your operating privileges. It wasn't a firing, but it was devastating. Surgery wasn't just my job. It was my identity. I walked out of the hospital with my badge deactivated and my future on hold. But while they attacked my reputation, our case was building momentum. The FBI raided my parents' house on a cold Tuesday morning. They seized laptops, hard drives, paper files, and 2 locked safes. Agents walked out with boxes of documents, and what they contained was worse than anything we had expected. There were cryptocurrency wallets tied to transactions worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Dozens of shell companies were registered to variations of my mother's maiden name. There were forged tax returns, falsified charitable filings, and emails proving they had coordinated lies about medical expenses to multiple family members. The fallout rippled fast. My sister's husband, Brad, filed for divorce days later. In his court filings, he accused Helena of forging his signature on loan applications and lying to him about their finances. His testimony to federal investigators was damning. Helena masterminded everything, he said. She told us Chris would never question it because he felt guilty. She said, we deserved the money because we had a family, and he didn't. The scope of the fraud ballooned. What had started as $180,000 in monthly transfers, once the subpoenas landed and records came in, pushed the total exposure to well over $1 million in stolen funds, fraudulent loans, fake charities, and laundered investments. And it wasn't just me. 7 relatives joined a consolidated civil suit as co-plaintiffs. My aunt had given them $40,000 for hospital bills. My cousin had co-signed a line of credit they'd never repaid. Every lie followed the same script. Chris isn't helping. We need you to. The legal momentum shifted hard in my favor. The federal indictment list grew longer by the week. Wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy, money laundering, identity theft. bank fraud, charity misrepresentation. Each charge stacked more pressure on them, each one increasing their potential sentence. But the Brennans weren't finished trying to fight dirty. My father showed up at Daniel's office one afternoon, unannounced and angry. Security had to escort him out after he threatened to make sure Chris never works again. Helena sent an email to my hospital board, claiming I had stolen family medical records. It was baseless, but it triggered another review. Rachel wasn't worried. Desperate people lash out, she said, but desperation doesn't change evidence. The investigation uncovered another bombshell. While under investigation, my parents had attempted to refinance the Lake Geneva property again, this time using a shell company and my forged signature. It was reckless and stupid, but it sealed the narrative for prosecutors. The U.S. attorney handling the case called me in for a meeting. "We've built enough for multiple felony indictments," she said. "Once we file, there's no walking this back." For the first time in months, I felt the balance of power shift. They had spent a lifetime believing they were untouchable, that family ties would shield them, that guilt would keep me quiet. Now the same arrogance was about to lock them behind federal bars. I looked at the evidence lined up on Rachel's conference table. Forged SBA loan applications, IRS filings, fake charity records, property deeds, emails, offshore account logs, and hours of audio transcripts. Each document was another nail in the coffin of their defense. "This isn't about revenge," Rachel said quietly. "It's about accountability." She was right. Revenge was never the goal. I didn't want to ruin them. I wanted them to face consequences. Real, measurable, legal consequences. For every lie, every theft, every manipulated story. And for the first time, that outcome was more than possible. It was inevitable. The Brennan family name, once a symbol of social respectability, was now synonymous with federal investigation and felony charges. Their media appearances stopped. Their lawyers stopped calling. Their friends stopped answering. The empire they built on deception was collapsing. And we were just getting started. The trial began 8 months after the raid. The U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Illinois was packed on opening day. Reporters, relatives, colleagues, even a few people I hadn't spoken to in years. The Brennan case had become a citywide obsession, a story of greed and betrayal that was now a full-blown federal prosecution. The government's case was straightforward and devastating. Over 3 weeks, prosecutors laid out a timeline of fraud stretching back 5 years. They showed the jury forged SBA loan applications bearing my name and signature. They displayed bank statements tracing my monthly transfers into shell accounts. They revealed offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands linked to Helena's maiden name. Every transaction was documented, every false claim traced back to a specific lie. Then came the charity evidence. Prosecutors showed how the Heartstrong Foundation had raised more than $400,000 in donations for non-existent heart patients, money that was rerouted into luxury cars, private vacations, and down payments on real estate. IRS records showed forged filings and fabricated expense reports. It was meticulous, deliberate theft. The courtroom gasped when the voicemail played. My mother's laughter echoed off the wood-paneled walls. "Chris is such an easy mark. Our personal ATM." It was damning, and there was no way to spin it. Helena's attorney tried to argue the money had been gifts. He claimed there was an implied understanding that I supported my parents voluntarily. But the forged signatures, the SBA loans, and the fake charity made that argument crumble. When it was Helena's turn to testify, she didn't. She invoked the Fifth Amendment, refusing to answer questions about the offshore accounts, the forged documents, or the false medical claims. Her silence spoke louder than anything she could have said. Victor, on the other hand, took the stand, and it was a disaster. "I never saw it as stealing," he told the jury. "Chris owes us. Everything he has is because of us. We gave him everything, and this is how he repays us?" The prosecutor let him talk, then dismantled his defense piece by piece. "Mr. Brennan, you told your son his father's heart medication cost thousands of dollars a month, correct?" "Yes," he said, shifting in his chair. The prosecutor held up a pharmacy statement. "In reality, it cost $87.46, correct?" Victor hesitated. "Insurance, correct?" "Yes." "You told your son the house was in foreclosure?" "Yes." The prosecutor displayed the county deed records. "But the mortgage was paid off years before those transfers, correct?" Victor didn't answer. "And you refinanced the property twice, pulling out $600,000 in equity?" "Yes." "And you did that while receiving monthly transfers from your son?" Yes." The final blow came when prosecutors revealed a new discovery, an attempt to refinance the Lake Geneva property again, after the indictment had already been filed. The application bore my forged signature, submitted by a shell company linked to Victor. The jury's faces hardened. This wasn't a one-time mistake. It was ongoing criminal intent. The defense had nothing left. Their entire argument, that it was family money, that I owed them, collapsed under the weight of evidence. What they had done wasn't a misunderstanding. It was organized crime. The jury deliberated for 5 hours. When they returned, the courtroom was silent. The four women stood and read the verdict. On the charges of identity theft, wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and money laundering. Guilty. Helena broke into tears. Victor stared straight ahead, his jaw locked as if refusing to believe it. I didn't move. There was no satisfaction in that moment, just a quiet, heavy finality. The damage they'd done could never be undone, but now, at least, there would be consequences. Sentencing was scheduled 3 months later. The courtroom was quieter that day, the frenzy of the trial replaced by a tense anticipation. The judge, a no-nonsense former prosecutor, delivered her ruling with deliberate calm. Victor and Helena Brennan, she began, you systematically exploited your son's trust, forged his identity, and used his name to construct a fraudulent lifestyle. You manipulated relatives, donors, and financial institutions, and even attempted to continue your crimes after being indicted. She paused, letting her words sink in. For these actions, this court sentences you to 6 years in federal prison each, followed by 3 years of supervised release. All assets associated with your fraudulent activity, including real estate, bank accounts, vehicles, and investment portfolios, will be forfeited to the United States government. Additionally, you are ordered to pay $250,000 in restitution to Dr. Chris Brennan. Months later, our civil case resolved separately, and the court entered a money judgment for additional damages. Helena sobbed quietly as marshals placed handcuffs on her wrists. Victor's expression didn't change. As they were led from the courtroom, he turned his head just once, not to look at me, but at the floor. As I stepped out of the courthouse into the cold Chicago air, reporters shouted questions. I ignored them. There was nothing left to say. The reckoning was over. The fallout was immediate. Every news outlet in Chicago carried the story. Within weeks, the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation closed my renewal review with no action. The hospital board reinstated my operating privileges and reactivated my badge. A year after the verdict, life in Chicago finally felt like mine again. The trial, the headlines, the humiliation, all of it was behind me. My parents were serving their sentences in federal prison, their assets seized, their reputation gone. The story that once defined me was now a distant headline. After the forfeiture, the government auctioned the seized assets. Restitution distributions from those proceeds, combined with the civil judgment, put me back on my feet. I bought the Lake Geneva house at the government auction. It was strange stepping into a place built on lies. I never moved in. I sold the house and used the proceeds to outfit and endow a clinic where it was needed most, on Chicago's South Side. 6 months later, the Brennan Free Clinic opened its doors. The name wasn't to honor them, but to reclaim it. What had been a monument to greed was now a place of healing. We offered free primary care, preventative screenings, and walk-in services, funded entirely by the money they'd tried to steal. Patients came from all over. Single parents working 2 jobs, people without insurance, immigrants afraid of medical bills. On our busiest days, we treated more than 100 people. I hired doctors and nurses who believed in the mission, and we grew faster than I imagined. The clinic wasn't my only project. With Daniel's help, I launched a nonprofit legal aid group for victims of family financial exploitation. We provided free legal advice, forensic accounting, and investigative help to people trapped in situations like mine. The waiting list grew every week. For the first time, I felt like I was doing something bigger than repairing my own life. I was protecting others from what I'd been through. Sophia's book about the case, Bloodline Theft, became a bestseller. It turned into a documentary deal and shone a light on how common financial abuse by family really is. Most victims never speak up. Our story showed them they could fight back. My parents tried reaching out from prison. Helena sent letters filled with apologies and excuses. I returned them unopened. Victor never wrote at all. Melanie's life fell apart after the trial. The divorce left her broke, her influencer brand collapsed, and creditors followed her everywhere. A year later, she waited for me outside the clinic one night. "I'm sorry," she said. "I was wrong. Please, can we start over?" I looked at her and shook my head. Family isn't blood. It's trust. And you broke that. Her eyes filled with tears. "So that's it?" "That's it," I said, and walked away. 2 years after the clinic opened, we held a small anniversary ceremony. The building was packed with staff, volunteers, and patients whose lives had changed because of what we built. Daniel was there, smiling as he handed out pamphlets for the legal aid group. Sophia signed books in the lobby. When it was my turn to speak, I stood by a bronze plaque on the wall. The Brennan Free Clinic, founded 2027. What once felt like a scar now felt like a victory. They tried to steal my future, I told the room. All they did was forge my resolve. The applause wasn't just for me. It was for every person who'd turned their pain into purpose. For every patient who could finally see a doctor. For every victim who now had legal support. What began as an act of betrayal had become a mission. Later that evening, I stood outside the clinic and watched the sun set over the south side. The media no longer called me the defrauded doctor. Now they called me the man who broke the cycle. And that was exactly what I had done. The cycle of guilt, manipulation, and obligation that once controlled my life was gone. Helena and Victor still had years left in their sentences. When they were released, they'd be convicted felons with no property, no money, and no social standing. Their future was no longer my concern. My chapter with them ended the moment the gavel came down. Some scars never fully disappear, but they don't have to define you. My parents weaponized my love and guilt to control me. In the end, those same qualities became my strength. They forged me into someone they couldn't manipulate, someone stronger, clearer, and unbreakable. The ledger was balanced now, not because every dollar was returned, but because I had taken back everything they tried to steal. My name, my purpose, my future. And for the first time in years, I could finally breathe without their lies weighing me down. YouTube just dropped this new hype feature. If you're hooked on this story, smash that hype button. It tells YouTube this video deserves to blow up, and it keeps even crazier stories coming your way.